Hey, in this video I want to explain how to use the Artificial Social Agent Questionnaire, ASAQ. But before we dive into the questionnaire, what do we mean with an artificial social agent? In the paper we give the following definition. ASAs are computer control entities that can be autonomously interacted with humans in a manner that can be regarded from a perspective of social rules of human-human interaction. So these are the social agents that often behave as in a way, in a social manner that we expect also when we look at human-human interaction. Also, this questionnaire is measuring experiences, the user experience or the experience people have when interacting with an agent. And in the paper we define that again as experience with an agent as a person perception or response that result from the use of these artificial social agents. So it's a response or perception of their interaction with these agents. That is what this questionnaire is measuring. Now let's step back. What often happens when we measure our agents? We often build them and then we study them in a certain domain and say, all right, what are the results? But we have done it with one agent, and if we want to replicate with another agent, we build another agent. And then also do some studies and see what the results. And they might not be the same. Now, the question is, can we not replicate the finding, or are those agents completely different and are we comparing apples and oranges? So that is a replication problem, which the ASAQ tried to address. Another problem, similar in a sense, is an interference problem. What we often see is we build an agent, for example, an agent who reads for you a story and is a bit funny, and we just think if things are funny then people should smile. Now we build such an agent and we let people interact with them and see them smile, and we have a bit sad agent and people don't smile. Then we see, look, smiling or funny agents can make people smile. So that is fine. The problem we're running into, if we find a study when we have this agent what's supposed to be make people are funny, then people don't smile. Now the question is, could we now draw the conclusion that funny agents don't make people smile, or is there another problem that our agent in the first place was not funny? So to make those inferences, we really need to understand or to validate what the agent is actually causing. Is it really funny? Now, ASAQ is trying to solve that trick. The learning outcomes. With the learning outcomes, at the end of the video, you should be able to explain the why and how ASAQ measures his data in a sense. How does it try to measure the construct he is interested in? How you could report the results, and also the sample size, how is that determined? And we also step back and look also what the evidence is there out there about its reliability and validity. Now, coming back to the problem I created, mentioned before, this replication problem. So what ASAQ is trying to solve, instead of how do I measure whether a system is funny, and if you want to replicate the study, do you have to replicate the whole robot or the whole agent? Instead, the idea is that you replicate the experience. And if you then measure with ASAQ another robot and you have the same experience, then you can say, yes, this experience in a sense is causing that, for example, weight loss. So instead of replicating robots, we can continue working in this field by replicating experiences. So it's key, therefore, if you report the results of your ASA, is also to report, specifically describe your agent, but also to report your experience people report interacting with this agent. Because if people in the future claim they have built a similar agent, then at least they have to show that they also result in similar experiences. If that is the same, then you can start making a claim whether you replicate this agent, and therefore for example, causal relationship with other factors that you try to study. Okay, so now you understand what the ASAQ tried to establish, a kind of standardized way of measuring user experiences. The design of ASAQ. ASAQ is a community-driven approach. Now, to understand what a community-driven approach is, let's start with other approaches that are often used when creating a questionnaire. The theory-driven. Here, a theory determines what is being measured in a questionnaire. Take, for example, personality. So you have the Myers-Briggs types of personality. So there's a theory about personality, and that has been used to create a questionnaire. However, if people don't feel that this theory is right or valid, then it doesn't make sense to use this questionnaire. So this questionnaire is really determined or dependent for its validity by the theoretical underpinning. Now, another strategy that people done, because they say, all right, theories might shift over time and those questionnaires become invalid. So therefore they use a more data-driven approach. Again, for personality, take the example there, instead of taking a theory that other people have done, they have just make loads of questionnaires or items and ask people to fill this in, these items, and they looked at clusters of these items. And they say, all right, based on those clusters, that forms an indication of what actually we should be measuring. So the Big Five personality is based on the data-driven approach, based on how people report about their personality. Now, this approach we did not use in ASAQ, because if we look at the community, they might be interested in various constructs, but they might also be causal relationships between those constructs. Take, for example, and I took the example here, is enjoyability and acceptance. So they might be highly correlated, but for the reason we are causal, because if you find highly enjoyable, you might accept an agent. So if you then use a data-driven approach, they would collect into one cluster, but the researcher might want to study enjoyability and acceptability separately. So therefore we have thought a community-driven approach. That means we have looked at what the research community is interested in and built on what the research community is interested in, built this questionnaire. Downside or a consequence of this is that some of the constructs, in a sense, might be overlapping and correlating, which you, of course, try to avoid if you do it data-driven. But in community-driven, the goal is that there are multiple questionnaires because people are interested in multiple things. So in a sense, you could look also in ASAQ as a set of questionnaires, separate questionnaires, and pick the one you're interested in. So that's the reason why it's community-driven. So how did we get to this need for this questionnaire? Because as I said there, if we can measure the experience people have, then we have an opportunity to replicate our research. So first question is there already a questionnaire out there? Now, we looked at the IVA proceedings, or intelligent virtual agents, over a number of years, from 2013 to 2018, and looked at the questionnaires that have been used. And to our surprise, or maybe people say not so surprisingly, we saw that like 77% of the questionnaires found were only used once in all those 5 years in those reportings. So there was not much you could say, all right, if we use the same questionnaire, then we can learn the experience here, understand it for the next agent. So a bit shocking, because if you don't have the same kind of measure instrument, and as a community, are you really building on each other's work? And what we also saw is over the years between 2013 and 18, each year we saw new questionnaires and new construct being proposed by the studies. So what we did when developing the questionnaire, we stepped back and looked, are those questionnaires really separate things, or could we group them and say underlying what maybe the questionnaires may be different, but they try to measure the underlying similar construct. And we did a large exercise with a group of experts on this, and we came to 24 constructs, which more or less cover 80% of all the constructs we saw in all those years and being reported, being used in the IVA community. So here you see the constructs. I'm not going to name them all, but there's a large set. So believability, usability, performance, likability, sociability. So what you could do is say, look, I want to know them all. So you can use the whole questionnaire. Or you could say, look, I'm only interested in performance. So you only pick that part of the questionnaire. So there are two ways of using this. Now, how does it look like actually? So now for each of those constructs, we have multiple items in the questionnaire. So here take, for example, enjoyability. Enjoyability is measured by 4 items in the questionnaire. So here you could say the agent is boring, it's reversed, so you have to multiply it by 1 at the end to reverse the value. And when you use the questionnaire, of course, you have to put the name of your agent there where the word between brackets agent. So if your agent is Bob, then you would say Bob is boring. And the same goes for the other. The user enjoyed interaction with the agent, Bob. Now, see that we could use I or the user enjoys. So we have a first perspective and a third perspective solution here. First perspective, if you ask people who actually interacted with the agent, then you would give them a questionnaire which says, I enjoy interacting with Bob. The third perspective could be that a person is observing someone else interacting. For example, if you make a video of people interacting with Bob and you ask another person to rate now the interaction, then you would use the user enjoys interacting with Bob. Yes? So if you use the questionnaire, you have to decide, is it an I or a the, meaning first perspective, third perspective. Now, and the other 2 items to measure enjoyability, it's interesting to interact with the agent or the agent is unpleasant to deal with. So we have reversed items and direct items. And the reversed items you have to multiply them by -1 at the end when you take the average from the construct. Okay, now there actually are 2 versions. There's the long version, which has 90 items. Then you have all the 24 construct and dimensions that we have. Then you have a very broad and deep insight, we think. But we have also a short version, which is only 24 items. There is only 1 item per construct/dimension. So that gives you a quick overview. So what we think most people will be using is they might be interested in a certain specific construct. Therefore, they pick that construct from the long version. But to communicate to other researchers the general experience of the agent, they also would use the short version. So the short version gives you a general overview, and the specific part of the long version gives you depth information where you're specifically interested. If you really want to know all of things, then of course do the long version. If you say, look, I'm not specifically interested in a certain construct, but I just want to report the experience people have, then you would only use the short version. So it's a bit, what are you after? End of the line, always good to have at least the short or the total long or a combination. And also report this. So, sample size is a question, specifically if we think about frequency approach, where we need a large number of, or an appropriate size of sample size to make an inference statistical test. Now, in the paper we offer 2 types of support for sample size determining. It could be that you want to compare one or of 2 agents, so then you might do a kind of a t-test at the end. And for this, the report we will look into, the paper will give you a sample size. So if you want to compare. The other option, we could see that in the future people might use it to say, look, I have 1 agent and I want to compare it with the data set of agent data that we already have. We have a representative set, the ASAQ representative to 2024, which has 29 agents in it, so you compare it to those 29 agents. So if in that situation we have another way of calculating the sample size that you might be using. Now let's make it more practical. Now let's say we are comparing 2 agents. And we are particularly interested in enjoyability. The other thing is, we say for a moment we are not interested, but enjoyability, that's the part we want to pick out of the questionnaire. And so how many sample size, how many participants do I have to include in my experiment? Now, enjoyability, and of course, you then have to figure out, am I really interested in tiny effects? Should I have a very powerful questionnaire that can, or a study that measures even the smallest kind of difference? Or am I really interested in only large big difference, and otherwise I'm not interested? Or do you say medium size? Now, we have determined what is medium, small, and large effects. So in our case, this is more 50%. The effects that we observed in the representative determined our medium size. Now, if we say we want a medium size kind of difference, be able to measure that if there is a difference between the two agents, then we could look it up. And in the paper, we specifically put tables there for a power of, or t-test for 0.8. So 8% chance if there is a difference to find it. And there we can look it up. Now here I've highlighted, so agents enjoyability, we want a medium-sized effect. That would mean 42 participants that we would need in our study. Okay, that's one way. Now let's, also some results. So if you say, look, I'm not interested in one of those dimensions or construct, but I want to use the whole long version of the ASAQ, then of course you have to pick the one, the construct that has the largest sample is therefore determined how much participants you have to include. Now here you see it for the long one, so if you take the whole questionnaire and you want a medium-sized effect, you need 116 participants in your questionnaire. If you only take the short one, 154, if you want a medium-sized effect. Okay, so these are quite reasonable numbers if you want to really have an understanding to start the difference between those agents. Okay, I promised two versions. So this was the version where you clearly have two agents you want to compare. But now imagine you say, look, I have just one agent, and I just want to know where my agent stands, or the experience people have there. In that way, or in that situation, you can compare your agent with the representative set that we have. And now the question that you first have to ask yourself, how much precision do I want my answer to be? And so you have to think about the scale, this representative scale set there is. So on this representative of all those agents, do you want to understand, all right, is it in the top, bottom, or in the lower part or the higher part? Then you would say you have a 50% accuracy. Very, very broad idea. Or you say, no, I want to know is it in the top quartile, the middle quartiles, or the lower quartile. Or say I split it up in 5. Then, okay, now in this example, I say 20 percentiles. So I wanted to know in 5 boxes, if you put all those agents, where am I? And that's the kind of precision that I want. So an error margin of 20% percentiles in this example. Confidence interval. So if you think about the confidence interval, if you want to use again the frequency approach, then quite customary is to take a 95%. So we stick to that. And now let's take then again enjoyability. If that is your interest, then you say, all right, if you take a 20% error margin, I would accept. Then enjoyability says 31 kind of participants that you would need. So with that number of participants, you could be able later to classify or position your agent compared to the other agents on a 20% of 5 base scale. Okay. Now here you see, if you're not looking for a specific construct, but just include the whole questionnaire. For the long version, here if you take, for example, 25% error margin, you will need 66 people in your study. And if you take the short questionnaire, and again, if you do 25 percentile, so you group the representative set in 4 groups, then you need 97 participants. Reporting. There's also some help there on reporting your results. First, what you could do is take your results and compare it with the representative set of 2024. There are 29 agents in this, which have been rated by 1,066 participants in total. So you can say, oh, how is my agent rating compared to Now or to Siri? So to give you a bit of a feel where you stand compared to other agents. So that's one way of reporting. What you can also do is take the whole representative set and say, am I very high or very low on my rating compared to the whole set? Now let's take the example. I've taken the Furby and this cute agent, and imagine it has a score on agent's appearance suitability, so is it suitable for the job? That people gave it a score of 1.8 on this thing. Now, then you can think, is 1.8 high or low? Now, look up in the table, because now you can look at where would it come to the percentile of other ratings received from other agents. Now, if we look here at the agent appearance suitability, then 1.8 would fall within 75 and 80 percentile, because the 75 is 1.74 and 80 is 1.8 something. So it would be in that margin. And now to give an interpretation, the paper also gives an interpretation. So between 75 and 90 percentiles, we would classify it as a high. So the Furby, we could say, compared to this 2024 set, has a high score when it comes to the agent's appearance suitability. So that gives you a bit of an interpretation on how to report your results. The 2024 sets are all third perspective data sets, so people looked at videos of others. But there is also data that we are developing collected on first person interaction. There are 10 agents that we have for this, so Copilot, Roomba, Bart, but also ChatGPT, where people actually reported based on their own experience. So that's another data set you could compare it with. Then reporting it, so we also support with an ASAQ chart, in which you can in one view see the scores on all different of the 24 construct dimensions. So we have the ASAQ chart, which is represented on the scale, because it is a -3 to 3, so it's the absolute scale, you could say. But we also have the ASAQ percentile scores. So then it's set compared to the data set, the 2024. And there you could see how it compares to other agents that we have. Now in the example here, you see the scores of Siri and Now, and in the absolute chart and in the percentile. And you could see in one glance, okay, this is the kind of profile the Now has. It's the blue. And Siri, you see, it's that's the pink line, is this kind of profile. Now, this picture, for example, you could put on your poster or in your paper, so your readers could in one glance see the whole profile experience people reported with your agent. Now, and this, we think, with these kind of things, that helps the community to later replicate studies, because then you would expect that people, if they say it's replicated, that they have a kind of similar profiles. Now, I promise also to give you some information about the reliability and validity information that is out there about ASAQ. Now, let's start about the reliability, equivalence reliability. So, are there correlations between the items of a construct or a dimension? Yes, we've done some extensive studying on this, and we found reliabilities from 0.6 to 0.87. With an average of 0.72. So 72 seems acceptable, some a bit lower than that, but it says we allow some variation because we want to capture sometimes the broad part, the whole of the construct, so these items might be a bit uncorrelated, but we allowed it because we want to capture the whole construct. And that was done in studies with 1,066 participants across 29 agents. Content validity, there we also have some information about that, in which we asked all the constructs that are now included have been examined by experts, and experts have confirmed that these items has something to do with those constructs that's measured. Yes, so there's experts that support that. Current validity, we also have work out there that analyze the correlations of ASAQ with other questionnaires, and for 80% of the construct that we have in ASAQ, we found moderate to high correlations with established questionnaires. Predicted validity, we have also some evidence there, because experts have also made a very rough prediction what they, if they looked at the agent, what they thought the values of those constructs should be ending up, and we compare that with the actual rating of users, and we found moderate correlation. So there is a bit of evidence there as well. Construct validity, also evident for that, in which the theoretical model has been fitted on the data, and there's a quite good fit between the model and the data to explain the data. It doesn't mean that constructs are never correlating, that's allowed in our model, but at least the general model can fit pretty well on the data itself. This has been done in one set in which we create the questionnaire, and again in a new data set with a new group of participants. This was replicated, and again we saw a good fit of the general theoretical model on the data. So that also is some evidence there for cross-validity. Let's recap. So what is the ASAQ measuring? So there's 90 constructs with also some with dimensions with this. And we have a long version and a short version where we assume that people will use parts of the long version for the parts that they're really interested in, and take the short version to have a general feel of the general experience people have. We also support ways of reporting ASAQ. So you could compare it with the representative set. Where do you stand your ASAQ measurement with that, for example, of Siri? You can look that up. Or you could use the ASAQ charts, which give one overview of the whole experience on the different dimensions. Sample size for determining, two ways for sample size determining. One, if you want to really compare two agents, or if you have one agent and want to compare it with the representative set. Now, we also talked about there's some evidence there about reliability and validity of ASAQ. What is also there already are translations, validated translation of ASAQ. We already have validated of in Chinese, in Dutch and in German. And interestingly, this translation has been validated, but also how you translate ratings that you have collected with the Chinese questionnaire, how they rated can be transferred back and forth to the ratings you observe with an English questionnaire, which make it possible to compare different data sets that were collected with different languages. If you want to know more about the questionnaire and want access to this data or the different version, there's a website which I suggest you go to, where you find more information about ASAQ. I hope you enjoyed it, and good luck with using ASAQ.